Welcome, everyone. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on getting started with security operations applications. Um, I wanted to just say a few words about the slide that we have up right now. I've shared the link in the chat. This is for our annual combined risk and security customer event that we have going on in Santa Clara in October. This is a free event for customers. There's no registration fee, and really it's a great opportunity to come together at ServiceNow headquarters and share best practices and insights around how other customers are using the platform, as well as hear from our leadership and product teams and experts from across the ServiceNow security operations as well. So feel free to check that out, use the QR code or the link in the chat. And again, we're here in our Getting Started with Security Operations Applications webinar. We run these webinars monthly really to help new customers especially get up to speed on how they can get started with their implementation and where are the most critical resources to help you get started, as well as for maybe existing customers who are going to be re-embarking on an implementation or starting an implementation of a different application. So we do run them monthly. We also have monthly office hours, which are more of an open forum to ask a little bit more in-depth questions or technical questions related to your environments, your implementations. Now, I'm Sarah Wood, and I work in the outbound product management team within security operations at ServiceNow. And I'm hosting today's session along with Tim Boswell, who also works in the security operations product team here at ServiceNow. We often have other subject matter experts on the call to answer questions throughout. So again, so happy to have you here with us, and thank you for joining. Again, these sessions are really about you, about helping you get up to speed on how to get started with your implementation. And we have some time at the end. If questions do pop up, you can use that time at the end to ask them, but we do encourage you to ask questions in the Zoom Q&A feature as well throughout the session, and we'll be taking a look at that as we go through to answer your questions in the Q&A and also live at the end of the session. We are recording this session, and I did post in the chat where you're going to be able to find that recording afterwards, as well as the slides. So if you want to revisit anything or if you want to share it with colleagues, you can look to that afterwards as well. And lastly, once you leave the session today, you should receive a quick survey on your screen. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete the survey. Let us know what you liked. Let us know where we can improve. It really does help us to sort of make the case for these types of webinars and make sure we can keep supporting you in the best way possible. So we'll also use that as an opportunity to follow up with you if there's any additional items that we might have not been able to cover that you want to hear from us about. We can also use that as an opportunity to learn what you might want us to follow up with you about. So again, thank you so much for filling that out when you do leave the webinar today. Our planned agenda for the day, again, most importantly, we want you to come away from this with a clear idea of your next steps towards your security operations implementation, wherever that may be, wherever you are at with that. And we're going to be showing you a number of different resources that help you dive deeper and help you get there with your implementation. So really, our goal here is to support you and provide you with those relevant resources to help ensure a successful start to your implementation. And so we're not planning on covering forward-looking statements, but sometimes these things do come up. So it's just a reminder with any forward-looking items, not to make any buying decisions based on that, as things can change on our roadmap and in the future. So starting off this first section with a little bit of the what is ServiceNow SecOps, and this is kind of just level setting for everyone to understand what is the security operations portfolio. If you're new to it or if you're not aware of the breadth of it, we do like to highlight that at the beginning. And I'll preface that with a little bit of a poll here. And this is all about understanding what are you planning to implement? So you are here, you might not be planning to implement, which is fine, or you might not be sure yet, which is also fine. But if you know that you're more on the security incident response side, or you're more on the vulnerability response side, or maybe you're doing both in your implementation, we would just love to hear from you and understand better who is in the audience, as that kind of helps us as we go through. So thank you in advance. It looks like most people doing both, which is great. So this will give you that high level view sort of how to approach your implementation here. All right, I'm going to wrap that up and proceed here. So as most of you will already know, the security operations portfolio does have a suite of different solutions or applications. And broadly, they fit into kind of these two areas on the left and on the right here. So on the left, we have that ability to respond to what we call exposures in your environment. So this could be vulnerabilities, right? With vulnerability response, we have different flavors of vulnerabilities there. So your host and infrastructure, of course, your application, your cloud and container vulnerabilities, as well as operational technology vulnerabilities. And then with configuration compliance integrated there, you have the ability to also detect and remediate misconfigurations in your environment, which can be other types of exposures. And then our latest sort of offering in this space is around security posture control. So this is all about hooking up your security tools and understanding where you might have gaps in your security hygiene, how to better remediate those, plugging those into your existing vulnerability response and configuration compliance workflows. And then on the other side of the portfolio here is that responding to incidents is sometimes referred to as enterprise security case management. So this is where your teams are, workflowing your standard security incidents in the SOC with security incident response, our SOAR solution. It could be major security incidents through our major security incident management solution. Data loss prevention type incidents using data loss prevention incident response. And then we also have a newer offering called Threat Intelligence Security Center. So as you may know, we do have threat intelligence integrated throughout security incident response, but with Threat Intelligence Security Center, this is really a purpose-built solution for those cyber threat teams to workflow the intelligence that they have coming in and create cases for threat hunting and things like that. And then on both sides of the portfolio, we also have this layer of Now Assist capabilities, and that's our generative AI offerings across both security incident response and vulnerability response. So we have various resources that we'll direct you to learn more, but that's your high-level view of things. And then just kind of looking a little bit more closely at what a typical workflow looks like across security incident response. Starting here, really it starts with integrating your existing security tools, so your SIM tools that you're using, and bringing that data into the platform where you have the ability to set up different rules and different configurations to automatically prioritize your alerts and create security incidents, and enrich that with data from your CMDB and from threat intelligence providers. You would also be able to integrate your different security tools so you can actually orchestrate outbound activity from the platform directly. So things like threat lookup, maybe email search and delete, all of those types of things. And Tim will talk a little bit more about this in the second section. And then just to give us sort of a flavor of what that looks like for anyone new to security incident response, this is the workspace view here, where your analysts would come in and workflow security incidents. And then looking at an actual incident here, we've highlighted some fun generative AI capabilities, including the incident summarization and recommended actions. But just to give us a little sense of what that looks like. And then on the vulnerability response side, this is another kind of high level look at what the workflow is. Again, like security incident response, starting with setting up your data that's coming in, your scanners, bringing in, deciding which, vulnerabilities to start bringing in to ServiceNow so that you can have that automated prioritization and risk scoring and assignment group, assigning out to assignment groups for remediation. And again, connecting all of the various security tools that you are using. We have um, over 200 different security specific integrations available in the ServiceNow store. So depending on what tools you use, it's very likely that we have an integration built. And obviously there are ways to build your own integrations as well. And then coming into the actual remediation workflows, we do provide workflows for that with respect to assigning out to remediation owners, bringing in solution recommendations from solution vendors, being able to conduct your patch orchestration from vulnerability response, and then exceptions and deferrals workflows. And finally, just closing out those vulnerabilities once you have remediated them with those rescans coming back into the platform. So again, just a flavor of what that looks like here in vulnerability response. In the vulnerability manager workspace, there are watch topics here where vulnerability managers can be tracking different groups of vulnerabilities to understand how the remediation is going and what is the impact, and surface all those insights again across the attack surface. Now that we've got that overview behind us, we're just going to look at a few resources before I pass it off to Tim for the implementation section. So product documentation, you're probably all well aware of this. It's a very critical resource for getting general information on the security operations features and functionality, as well as more in-depth technical product information. We always publish our release notes here. So the last release on July 31st, you'll see release notes in here for that release and upcoming ones, and then other useful setup content. And again, all of these links are going to be shared in the community page for this event, which I put in the chat. We do have a series of demos and video resources. So for example, if you're interested in getting up to speed on the Security Operations Now Assist or generative AI offerings, we have a couple of great demos on the YouTube channel that we'll share. And then there's also a playlist with all of these live on ServiceNow webinar recordings and a more in-depth playlist for vulnerability response on this Ask a Ranger playlist, as well as, again, demos that we are updating regularly there. And then ServiceNow University is a really great place to go. There's now a ton of free on-demand courses available specific to security operations. So we have our security operations fundamentals training that is available instructor-led and on-demand, as well as more in-depth VR implementation training and security incident response implementation training. So very useful for those of you who might be implementing on your own or perhaps in conjunction with a partner, but you want to have more knowledge and skills on that implementation and admin side of things. So do check that out for some courses. We have a post in the community that really curates the relevant security operations training as well that we'll share. The next one here is a community. You might have heard of this webinar through the community, but essentially this is your go-to one-stop shop, we hope, for security operations resources. We have a new resource library in the community that links what we think are the top most critical resources for the product areas and for general topics related to security operations. So the idea is that it's easy for you to navigate and find some of the top resources linked there, whether it's something that's in a knowledge article in Now Support, whether it's in documentation or on a YouTube channel. We try to link everything in a way that's organized and structured for you. And so you can find that on the landing page of our community, as well as all of our upcoming events, such as these webinars. I did mention our events. So this is the events post. And of course, we have um, these getting started in office hours monthly. And then we also do quarterly what's new and roadmap webinars. So definitely check that out and stay tuned for the upcoming webinars that we do have. The last thing I'll mention here to get deeper on SecOps applications is the developer site. So this is for all audiences, probably a little bit more for the technical folks who want to have a personal developer instance and really kind of play around with the new applications or new releases and install them themselves and configure them. So there is a developer program that you can sign up for to get that access. And you'll also be able to find on there additional documentation for technical things like APIs and libraries and different UI components for ServiceNow. So check that out if you are interested. And now we will move into the next section that kind of goes into a little bit more of how should you go about starting your implementation journey. But the first thing we'll do is understand a little bit better about where you're at in your implementation journey. So again, it helps us kind of gauge the audience and see where you're at and maybe get you thinking about what your plans are to implement. So whether it's now or in this quarter or maybe by the end of the year in Q4, no plans or something else, let us know in the chat. It's always good to see where people are at. It looks like most people are sort of in the thick of it, so implementing now or in Q3. And then we know that it's a journey, so some are planning to implement later this year. And if you don't have plans, that's okay too. Hopefully this will help you kind of come up with some of those plans, bring them back to your teams. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and move right along. I'll hand some things over to Tim now to take us through your implementation option.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Tim Boswell here, and I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so just talking about implementation. This is not how to install and configure security operations. There is a class that talks about that in the ServiceNow University. And if I even try to fit that into 20 minutes, that would just be a huge mess. So really what I'm going to talk about is more like, okay, let's say I've just purchased ServiceNow, or I've just acquired it, or I've just acquired security operations on ServiceNow. Where do I go next? What are my options? How do I plan things out? So this is more like a strategic or business level. How do we go about implementing security operations? And so I used to work in the SOC, and I was a user of security operations, mostly security incident response, but also a little bit of vulnerability response. And a lot of what we're going to go through here in the next 20 minutes or so, it's really about, I remember our journey because I remember when we installed the out-of-the-box version of security incident response over July 4th weekend, all the things that we had to do leading up to that. And there are a lot of things that are going to be in here that I wish I knew. So I'll be going through that. And also just do want to say hello to our partners. I know we have a lot of partners on this webinar as well. So thank you for joining us. And there was also a question, Amy asked a question about security ops, security operations applications in personal developer instances. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit. So I did not specifically answer that in the Q&A because I'm just going to mention that briefly as we go through here. So Amy, if you could just sit tight for a few minutes and we'll get to that. Anyway, on with the show. Um, Again, let's say I have just acquired security operations. Where do I go from here? How do I do this? Do I do it myself? Do I go with a partner? Your options are, yes, you could self-implement. If you feel like you have a solid ServiceNow platform team, engineering team, they know how to install, configure, support, and maintain ServiceNow and all the applications that come with ServiceNow. that is an option for you. You could absolutely self-implement. Um, the downside to that is then you take on all the risk and you may lose out on some experiences. And what I mean by that is by going with an implementation partner, those implementation partners, they install, configure, and maintain ServiceNow and ServiceNow security operations for customers on a day-to-day basis. That's all they do all day, every day is they go out and install ServiceNow and install security operations, install security incident response, vulnerability response. And so if I'm a new customer and I'm not sure what to do, I can lean on that implementation partner for guidance and for recommendations and advice. Or let's say there's something I want to do. There's a certain integration that I want to install. That implementation partner, they could step in if it's not a good idea and say, hey, before you turn on that integration, you should consider doing this first. We've seen other customers try to do that, and there are certain things that you should do before you turn on that integration. So you're going to get that wealth of knowledge that comes with that implementation partner. And we do have a very large ecosystem of partners that implement and support ServiceNow for our customers. And then we also have our own expert services within ServiceNow. Not nearly as large of a community there as our ecosystem of implementation partners, but we do have our own expert services. And then if you are a particularly large and complex customer, you may need a co-delivery where expert services works with the implementation partners, and you have both our own ServiceNow expert services and those implementation partners working with you and helping you to implement and configure and support your ServiceNow implementation and your security operations implementation. So lots of options there. There was a question, if you go into the Q&A, somebody asked about partners, and I posted a link to the partner finder. So if you're not familiar with our ecosystem of partners, that's a good place to get started. Sarah, can I go to the next slide, please? I think I've talked long enough about that. Let me just kind of talk through a maturity model around vulnerability response and security incident response. This is very generic and how most customers start out. And that level zero there on the far left, where it says manual operations, customers who have not yet acquired and installed vulnerability response, this is usually where they are. They're trying to do spreadsheets, or they're trying to do manual remediation of their vulnerabilities. They're getting an export out of Qualys or Tenable, and they're putting it into Excel, and they're trying to go through it and match it up with the asset owners and do all that. And so that's the first problem that they're going to be able to solve when they implement vulnerability response, is they're going to be able to have that single system of record. They're going to be able to align it with the CMDB and look up those configuration items, and also identify where they're missing configuration items, and then start to match against those asset owners. And so if I'm a customer and I'm starting out with vulnerability response, that's where I want to start out, is I want to be able to consume those vulnerabilities into ServiceNow and match it up with my asset information. And then that streamlined remediation, the next thing I want to do is I want to start adding some automation, like automated assignments, automated prioritizations. I want to be able to use ServiceNow as that single system of record for my deferrals or my exceptions. Let's say there's a vulnerability that resides on a healthcare device, and that healthcare device, it's running on Windows 98, and we can't take it off Windows 98, because if we try to update it to something more modern, it's going to cause it to fall out of FDA compliance. And so we need some kind of some risk acceptance around that, and doing that in ServiceNow that allows us to better manage that process, and better manage that deferral or that exception. So that's where customers go next. And then finally, number three there, advanced risk scoring within ServiceNow, doing things beyond just using that CVSS score, or that score that they get from the vulnerability scanner, and really adding in those mitigation controls and factoring those into that risk scoring, so that way they aren't treating a low priority vulnerability like it is a priority, so they can better handle and better prioritize those vulnerabilities, but then doing other advanced things, using ServiceNow to integrate with our risk management tools, our patch orchestration tools, and ultimately using tools like security posture control to better understand the holistic security posture of those assets. So starting out very, very simple. Hey, I want to consume those vulnerabilities, match them up with my assets, so that way I can start to streamline that workflow and then adding in automation, then adding in those advanced things. So if we look at the security incident response maturity model, Sarah, if we can go to the next one, please. Thank you. Um, Same thing. A lot of customers who are not using ServiceNow yet for security, they're trying to do everything in that EDR tool or that SIM tool. Oftentimes just maybe sending an email over to IT saying, "Hey, I need you to do something." But when they start to use ServiceNow for security, they start to integrate those security tools. We get that again that unified visibility. We have all those security tools coming into one place, and then we can correlate all of those alerts and events with that asset information, that user information. But then we could start doing things like um, automating events going to other individuals. Like, let's say we need IT to do something as part of the response to a security incident. Maybe we need the GRC team to do something, or maybe we need HR to do something if it's an insider threat, and being able to automate some of that workflow and streamline that. But also starting to build out a security metrics program. A lot of customers get value out of doing security on the ServiceNow platform because ServiceNow is really good at reporting and metrics and dashboarding and visualizing all of those reports and metrics. And so now we can start measuring things and start measuring, are we gaining efficiencies by using ServiceNow for security? Because we have all of this coming into one place. So now we can track it and we can track our workflows and our process flows. And now we can start adding in playbooks and workflows. And so number two, streamline remediation. That's what we're talking about. Is now we're adding more automation. We're correlating and enriching more of that data so we can more quickly identify, is it a true positive, false positive? What type of incident is this? Who needs to act on this? Are there other triggers downstream? A lot of we do see a lot of customers that use those integrations with their endpoint detection and response tool to isolate those laptops because they've said, well, I don't want to wait for the analyst to go in and start investigating. I would rather that ServiceNow triggers the EDR tool to isolate that endpoint and then investigate. And if it turns out to be a false positive, then they can unisolate that endpoint. They can quickly give it access again because they said, these particular assets, they're just too risky. We can't risk having some type of compromise of those assets. So leveraging that, but then also bringing in more intelligence and using the Now Assist, the artificial intelligence that ServiceNow built ourselves, the proprietary AI within ServiceNow called Now Assist. And we're able to use things like generative AI and agentic AI to help out with that workflow. And so what I mean by that is we've got a bunch of summaries we have to write up or root cause analyses that we have to write up, but we don't want that security analyst spending a lot of time doing report writing. So we can use generative AI to help them and make that report writing easier. So they're spending less time doing that and more time actually investigating incidents and responding to incidents. And then moving all the way up there, number three on the right-hand side, as we add in other functionality within ServiceNow, if we feel like, hey, we're really comfortable with security incident response, now we're ready to move on to Threat Intelligence Security Center, then we can use ServiceNow to better consume, manage, and curate all of that huge, massive amount of threat intel that we're consuming. But we can also track and manage our threat intel cases. We can do threat-driven threat hunts. We can do situation-based threat hunts, and we can do mission-based threat hunts, and we can track and manage that all within ServiceNow. So then later, if those incidents get turned over to litigation or law enforcement or the auditors come in, we have that audit trail. And so what we're really talking about here is we're talking about doing case management for our security incidents and our threat intel incidents. And we're also talking about doing that security, orchestration, automation, response type of activity. So SOAR, it's not just a product for us. SOAR for us is a capability. It's within security incident response, and that's what we're talking about here. So the idea here is start out with something simple, start integrating your security tools, bring it all into one place, and then gradually start adding automation and gradually adding more functionality. All right. Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Things that you need to consider as you're rolling out. Do you want to set up the integration to collect VR data from a third party? And I'm talking about not just, yes, of course you're going to integrate Tenable or Qualys or Rapid7 or Tanium or Wiz or Sneak or whatever tool you're doing, but also think about what other VR data do you want to start bringing in? Do you need to bring in vulnerability threat intelligence? Do you need to bring in other data related to those vulnerabilities? So the first thing you want to understand is how are we going to integrate our vulnerability scanners, and then how are we going to start ingesting those vulnerabilities? You don't want to just flip a switch and have everything come in all at once. What most customers will do is they'll start out with like maybe a subset of vulnerabilities, or maybe they start out with like their high priority or high severity vulnerabilities, or maybe they start out with all the vulnerabilities based on location and start consuming those. But then you need to also understand what other integrations do we want to bring in? What other VR data do we want to bring in from those third-party tools that we're using to enrich that data? Um, and then you want to understand, like, okay, how are we going to slice and dice all this vulnerability data in ServiceNow? And the best way to do that is really look at what is your existing process and how can you emulate that process in ServiceNow. What I mean is if you are not using ServiceNow for vulnerability management today, how are you consuming those vulnerabilities? How are you reviewing those vulnerabilities and assigning those vulnerabilities out to other people? And how can you improve that process in ServiceNow? And so that's where you would want to start out. And that's where you can understand like, okay, who do these vulnerabilities need to be assigned to? How do we want to group these vulnerabilities? What actions are taken, things like that. And the byproduct of that is you're going to start to get some process improvement. You're going to start seeing improvement around how you do vulnerability management because things that you can't do without ServiceNow or things that you can't do unless you have ServiceNow, you're going to be able to take advantage of, like that vulnerability grouping and that automated assigning of those vulnerabilities. So no longer are you going to be emailing spreadsheets or links to spreadsheets to individuals. You're going to be automating that process within ServiceNow. And so you want to consider like, okay, what other process improvement and workflows do we want to apply to our vulnerability management operation that we can't do because we don't have those mechanisms that reside in ServiceNow. So you want to start thinking about that. And then you want to start thinking about what kind of metrics, what are the things that you want to measure? Maybe there's certain statistics and metrics that your leadership are constantly asking for. Like how long does it take for us to patch critical vulnerabilities, or which business units take the longest to patch vulnerabilities. So those are some of the things that you want to consider, and then you want to plan for that go live. Sarah, next slide, and I'll try and see if I can get us back on time. I'm going to run through these very briefly. This is kind of an eye chart, but if you want to look a little bit more at this in depth, you can go look at this in the community. But these are some of the components of VR that you'll need to think about. The again, those third-party scanners like Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, Tanium, others. How are you going to map those assets against those vulnerabilities? What are you going to do? How are you going to handle when a vulnerability comes in, but there isn't a configuration item in the CMDB to map that? We provide some out-of-the-box ways to deal with that. And this is one place where our customers get a lot of value is because now they can use vulnerability response to augment how they populate and manage their CMDB, but that's something that you will definitely want to consider. Just a few things to point out here. Sarah, the next slide. And then once you get those core capabilities in place, some additional maturity level capabilities that you want to consider, things like, okay, so now that I have this in place, what do I need to do next? How do I take things to the next level? How do I do exception management? How am I going to be using change management? How am I going to be connecting this with my GRC team? Okay. In a few more minutes, and then I'll have to wrap up some considerations with security incident response. Those user personas up there at the top. So within security incident response, we provide a lot of different roles. And the reason why is because our customers have told us that they're using security incident response for all kinds of different security incidents, and they can't just immediately give everybody access to everything within security incident response. So something you're going to want to think about is, okay, who's going to be using this? And who do we want, how do we want to control that access based on those personas and based on those roles? And you might just want to start out and say, well, I just want my IR team to use it for now. And I do want to give them access to everything for now. But then at some point, you're going to say, well, maybe I want my tier one to only have access to these incidents and tier two and tier three to have access to those incidents. So those are things that you're going to want to think about. And then looking at your existing process flows and your security operate or your standard operating procedures and understanding like how can we apply those in ServiceNow and how can we improve that, but then using ServiceNow to mature and improve your process flows, whether it's using the playbooks or the workflows in ServiceNow, or just the fact that now you have one place where you can track and manage all of your security incidents and have that audit trail. But then also coordinating with those security teams and other teams like IT, understanding that, okay, IT, when we get a security incident and we need you to do something, you're going to start receiving tasks from security incident response, making sure that they're aware of that, things like that. And then again, using security incident response for your security metrics program, being able to pull those reports and things like that. So let me just run through a few more considerations in the next three slides. Again, the best way to review these is to go to the community and look at these more in depth. But you're going to want to do things like understand uh, when you ingest that security alert data into ServiceNow, what's that mapping going to look like? What's that going to look like when it creates a security incident record, and what's going to be in those fields in the security incident record, and how are we going to automate that, and how are we going to use tools like Process Automation Designer to streamline those workflows and build in those workflows and automate those workflows and things like that. And then as you go on in the other implementation components, if we go to the next slide, I think it's core plumbing number two. Yes. Um, Looking at, again, okay, which teams will be involved? Which teams are going to have access to and which teams are going to receive tasks from security incident response? And then how are we going to use security incident response to monitor things like workload and efficiency? How are we going to use those reports and those metrics and things like that? And then actually, I wonder if I can, yeah, I'm just going to change the slide myself. The additional SOAR implementation components. Okay, once I get everything up and running in security incident response, what do I need to do next? How do I start leveraging that external threat intelligence and bringing that into ServiceNow? How can I do more to automate, and how can I do things like convert emails from my users and my employees and convert those into security incidents, so that way it's easier for people, for those users and those employees to report security incidents to that security team. Not just phishing emails, but just in general. Hey, I received a funny SMS text message. I feel like I should report this to my security team. I don't know how to do that. So yeah, you can use catalog items, but we found that customers find that the easiest way for their employees to do that and their users to do that is by sending an email to that team. So let me just wrap up my portion before I hand it over to Sarah. I think she's probably tied up with Q&A. I'm going to see if I can advance these slides. Nope, it's not working. Sarah, I'm going to need you to do it. I was trying to do that so you wouldn't have to. We have a lot of resources to get you going. We have the partner finder. I did post a link in that because somebody asked about that early on. And so this is a great way to identify if you don't already have an implementation partner you're working with, to identify which implementation partner might be right for you based on your needs. We also have our own expert services, and I think there's a link in here. If you go to the next slide, there's a link to connect with them as well. Yep. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know, maybe I should go with expert services, or maybe I should do like a code delivery. So if you want to find out more about expert services, is where you can do that. And then I'll wrap it up. And this is Amy. This is where I'm going to get to your question. So yes, you can install security operations in those personal developer instances. Before doing so, I recommend going to Now Create and reviewing some of the information we have here. The reason why I wanted to save this to the end, Amy, is because for anybody who doesn't know, uh, the applications within ServiceNow, most of them, you can install those for free in your developer instance, in your personal developer instance, or if your company or your employer has a developer instance, you can install most ServiceNow apps for free. We don't check for entitlements and licenses until you move to production. And so all of these security operations applications, you can install those there, but there is one caveat, and that is Now Assist, which is our AI product. You cannot install those in dev instances or in personal developer instances, and the reason why is because of the infrastructure that is required to run those, because those are run within our own private cloud. That doesn't go out to like OpenAI or Anthropic or anything like that. It is run within ServiceNow. So that is the caveat. If you are a customer, though, or a partner, and you're saying, well, I need to evaluate Now Assist, or I need to do some training on Now Assist, there are some mechanisms to do that, whether it's through the ServiceNow University or whether it's through your account team or your partner manager, just talk to them. There are mechanisms so that way you can get access to Now Assist in developer instances. But I do want to close out and hand it back to Sarah on Now Create. Now Create is where we have all of our implementation guides, all of our process guides, our best practices guides, our scoping guides, and various success packs and starter stories. So if you're getting ready to install ServiceNow, or if you're getting ready to go find a partner to help you install ServiceNow, I highly recommend going to Now Create and reviewing the material there. So I tried to do, there's a lot of material that I tried to fit into 20 minutes. That's really not going to do it justice. So after this webinar, I strongly recommend going back to the community and reviewing the content we have there, in addition to the other resources that we're providing here. And Sarah, I'll let you have the remaining time.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks, Tim. That was great. We'll get into the final section here around achieving value. So this is more about the why we think it's important to start implementing. And first, of course, we'd love to hear what your top desired business outcomes are. So we have people that might be more interested in accelerating their response to security incidents, or maybe it's vulnerabilities, specifically critical vulnerabilities or other types, maybe reducing the effort. And of course, there's reducing attack surface. You can check all of them if you would like, but just good to get a sense of where people are at and what you're most interested in. And the reason why is because we think it's super important to start with those outcomes that you're looking to get as you're planning out your implementation, so that you can sort of prioritize which areas to target first and sort of phase out your implementation if you are doing a larger scale implementation of SIR and VR, as most of you said that you are. Um, of course, we can get to that value. We can get to those different business outcomes depending on what your priorities are and where you do start with your implementation. And we do have customers across the board that have been able to achieve these types of results. And what I typically like to highlight in this slide is that it's a pretty quick getting to those results. So just right out of the box, you're going to get so much automation that's built into VDR and SIR around, bringing in those vulnerabilities and grouping them together and assigning them out to remediation owners. And similarly with your incidents, bringing them in, grouping them and creating incidents from all of the alerts that are coming in, and doing that prioritization and having that context within ServiceNow from your CMDB, for example. So some of these highlights are really great. We like to show them, but mostly we like to say that you can get to a lot of this value within 6 months or so of going live. So that's the good news. We always like to highlight our ServiceNow team. Tim started out by standing up the SOC at ServiceNow, which I always like to add. So he knows about this firsthand. But of course, we are users of security operations. So we are customer zero, as we say. We continue to adopt our latest innovations and work with the security team within ServiceNow to get feedback and help shape the product for customers. And so a lot of the stuff that's created for the internal teams is also made available to customers through things like content packs and also enhancements and releases. So we do have great results within our internal team. This is showing a little bit more on the vulnerability management side. 99% plus accuracy in assigning vulnerabilities, really high SLA attainment, and productivity gains, which is great. And more to come on this with Now Assist, of course, generative AI helping to augment that. And then similarly on the security incident response side, a lot of value just from, moving from the manual processes that Tim was describing over to prioritizing alerts and automating processes. So lots of cost savings there, and productivity gains. So again, we're active users of our product here at ServiceNow, and we're always trying to get feedback from customers and from our internal customers around improving the solutions. But like I said, we really feel that getting to those types of results starts with setting your vision and setting your outcomes as that first step. So I've got some examples here on the screen for vulnerability response, and then I'll share some for security incident response, just as types of outcomes that you might choose to prioritize in your implementation. So typically customers will sort of focus in on one or two outcomes that really tie back to their key challenges so that they can prioritize those for their implementation and be able to have metrics to measure progress and say, look, we implemented X and we achieved this result, right? So that's really, really key for teams to show that business impact. And then Now creates another great place that Tim talked about that will have a lot of these outcomes listed out. And we do have a post in the community that's useful. But I'll just share a couple as well on the security incident response side, if that's your area of priority. Again, some of them relate to operational efficiency, some are more on the cost side, and then risk mitigation, of course. So just some suggestions in terms of where you might want to go with your metrics and how you might want to map your implementation out from an outcomes perspective. Looking to wrap this section up, a couple of resource highlights on this front, other than that community post I just mentioned. We do have customer stories published on our website, servicenow.com. So check these out if you want to sort of, again, if you're building that business case, you want to see what other customers that are similar to you have achieved or how they've gotten to success with security operations. You can filter by product area and be able to learn a little bit more about the outcomes that they've achieved, which can be useful for building that business case. And then with ServiceNow Impact, this is, there's a range of different resources that Impact offers. So First off, it's a value acceleration solution within ServiceNow, and it's all about helping you maximize your value out of your investment with ServiceNow. So if you're not sure about whether you have access to impact or if you would like more information, we would recommend reaching out to your account team, your account executive or your customer success manager to find out more. But essentially, there's a range of different packages with different offerings, and so some will include things like having a, well, they will all, I'm pretty sure, include a designated team for you with value recommendations and additional technical support, and then other access to training and expert services. Closing out with a little bit of some of the resources. We kind of talked about these, but if you want more info on impact, you can look at that QR code or catch the link when we do share these slides. There's ServiceNow University being the hub for training and certification, and then expert services for that expert help on the implementation front from ServiceNow experts. This is our summary of key resources, a great slide to share with colleagues and just have all those links in one place in terms of some of the top resources that we chatted about. Again, we're going to share these slides. I did put in the chat where you can find them afterwards. And join us at future Live on ServiceNow events. So like I said, we do run these monthly and additional office hours for more specific implementation questions. So check out our events post in the community. That's where you can register for future Live on ServiceNow events. There was a question around this event we have for security operations and risk customers in Santa Clara. We do know there's been interest from other regions like Europe. We are currently planning this specific event in Europe, although there's other events that do take place globally. But we know that there's interest, so we will be open to taking that feedback and considering what we can do for future years. So thank you for that interest. All right, we're right at the top of the hour, so I think we'll wrap it up there. I really want to thank everybody again for attending and for their engagement. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you'll complete the survey, take a minute to do that, and also join us at future events.